Hello, Professor Robin Kearns. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed today. We really appreciate your help and your time. For the audience, Professor Kearns is our expert for this interview. As a professor of geography, he is currently heading the School of Environment at University of Auckland in New Zealand. Would you like to introduce yourself further, Professor Kearns?
Yes, kia ora. Kia ora is the common greeting here in Aotearoa, otherwise known as New Zealand, and always good to speak to Canadians. I did my PhD in Canada, actually, at McMaster University over in Ontario many years ago now, but continue to have strong links with Canada. I have a particular interest in islands. I live on an island, and of course, New Zealand is an island nation, but I live on the third most populated island in New Zealand, which actually is an island about 40 minutes by ferry offshore from Auckland. And because we're still dealing with a bit of an Omicron outbreak, I'm mainly working from home. So I bring you greetings from Waiheke Island, which is out in the Tikapa Moana, which is otherwise known as the Hauraki Gulf, the waters off the city of Auckland. So yeah, I'm a social cultural geographer, not doing too much research at the moment, mainly in administration, heading up the School of Environment. And yeah, happy to have a conversation. I'm not so sure about an expert on Pacific Islands, but I've been to a few and, know a few Pacific people. So let's see how the conversation goes.
Great. So now we'll start with our first question. Have you ever been to Niue, and what are your favorite places in Niue?
Well, yes, I have been to Niue. I couldn't tell you the exact year, but it was sometime in the last decade, and I went up there with a very good friend of mine who's a poet and a artist, and we spent a week there, and it was a very, very interesting week because we spent a lot of time with a local Niuean artist, and my friend Greg and he were working on some pieces of art while we were up there. But that's digressing a little bit. Favorite places up there? Well, I think I would mention just two as a sample. One would be the natural landscape, going on a walk through the very jagged limestone landscape, down towards the coast. And one of the characteristics of Niue is that it is not like many of the typical Pacific islands or maybe even Caribbean islands with long white sand beaches. It's a raised ancient coral island, so it has a lot of cliffs, and its rock is very jagged, but it does make very spectacular landscapes. And you wouldn't want to fall if you're walking on a path because the rock is very, very jagged. But the walks out to the coast are absolutely spectacular. And then I'll mention a sort of a more of a social place, and that's called I think its name was the Washboard Cafe, or the Wash Bar or something. But anyway, it's a bar, but it really is very unlike a bar that you would get anywhere here in New Zealand or in Canada. And the reason is you can just walk right in and open the fridge and take a beer out of the bar, and there's a book there, and you just write in the book what you've taken. And then at the end, there's probably someone around, but they're not, they may be there, they may be not, but you just, pay the person if you see them. If you don't, you just leave the money on the counter. So I just think that's a really beautiful sort of reflection of the way that there is a different sort of level of, priority around sociability and valuing of sense of community, really, that there is that level of trust.
So definitely.
It's a common sort of meeting place there. So those are two places for example.
Yep, great. That really reflects how people in Niue trust each other. Next question is, what are the pros and cons of having a low national population?
Well, I mean, I would guess that probably the example I just gave would be one of the pros in terms of a level of trust, that the smaller a community, the often not always, but often the highest level of what's known as social capital. Social capital is the building up of a sense of reciprocity and a sense of community. And just as we might talk about financial capital and that sort of money that gets exchanged between people, also too social capital gets exchanged. You trust another person, then they trust you, and then it becomes a tight-knit community. So I think that whether we're talking about Niue or any community, it could be a rural community in Canada. The size does have an effect on a level of trust. On the con side, one of the issues about the demographics of Niue is very typical of Pacific Islands in general, and that is that young people outmigrate. And so there is actually a larger population of Niueans living here in the city of Auckland than there are in the whole country of Niue. The nation of Niue has a population of, I think, something like maybe 1,200. I can't remember, something like that. But its demographic is quite an aged population, and so one of the difficulties there is the healthcare needs and the fact that there's a low pool for a labor force, and that in turn affects the opportunities for say doing tourism ventures. So those are a couple of things that come to mind. I'm sure that there are others, but there's a couple of examples.
Yep, great.
I have read your article recounting your trip in Niue. You said that there were no doctors seen on the island. Do you think it's due to the lack of population?
Yeah, I mean, I don't particularly recall that detail, but it's not uncommon that small islands find it very difficult to sustain robust medical care, and sometimes the need for medical care is simply not great enough to justify having a doctor there all the time. So commonly what would happen would be that there might be highly qualified nurses or paramedics that would cover off as much of the medical care as they can. And then if someone was in acute need, they would get flown off the island. So that's in some ways, again, an isolated island like this, there is a strong analogy to, say, an isolated rural area, and many rural communities in New Zealand, just like in the north of Canada, wouldn't necessarily have a full-time doctor as such, but might have a situation where the sort of basic comprehensive medical care is covered by practice nurses or paramedics, and then acute care would be covered either by a visiting doctor, say a doctor comes for 2 or 3 days every month, or if there is an emergency, then an air ambulance comes and flies someone off. In the case of Niue, it would be either across to Australia and Brisbane, or south to Auckland or something like that, or maybe closer to other Pacific nations like Samoa, Fiji, that sort of thing.
So that means that they might need to call a helicopter in case of emergency, right? Let's say a person gets into an accident, or while he was hiking on some of the chasm or the cliffs, he fell apart and then suffered from very serious injury. And probably they would need to call a helicopter, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's, I don't know the details. It could be beyond helicopter range. It might be a fixed wing air ambulance or something like that. But that does happen. I mean, we have islands south of New Zealand that are very isolated and not even populated. No permanent population. Only a few sort of conservation workers. And a few years back, someone was attacked by a shark just off one of these islands, Campbell Island, and it was one of the longest helicopter evacuations ever. But they did get the guy off, and they managed to treat his injuries. But it was a hugely long helicopter trip. So yeah, that is often what has to happen.
All right.
Or of course, the other option, is through telemedicine, where qualified healthcare professionals who are not medical doctors, like nurses or paramedics, can then speak to a doctor through a screen, just like we are now, and be guided as to what to do until someone can. So I think there are a range of possibilities. Just as we can, teach a whole course now, just sort of sitting at home with our laptop, also to a medical specialist, a trauma injury specialist or something could talk to a local through through this sort of system.
You mentioned that a lot of Niueans actually live in New Zealand. Right? Why do you think this happens, and do you think this is a good thing? What are its impacts on Niue?
Do I think it's a good thing? I mean, I don't really have a strong view either way, but I think it's a very understandable thing. I mean, I would say that it would be not too different to maybe people growing up on, small towns and cities in the prairies of Canada, and going to university in Vancouver or back across to Toronto, wanting to be in a bigger city. Because I think that some of that is to do with the sort of the social imperative of wanting to meet more people rather than just being in a small town. And some of it, more importantly, is probably an economic imperative where if there just aren't jobs at home, then you go to where the jobs are, and jobs are in a bigger city. And in the case of New Zealand, there is an agreement, so there's easy flow of people backwards and forwards. You don't need to have special visas because there is a long-standing relationship between Niue and New Zealand. So people migrated here, and now there are maybe third generation Niueans who are in New Zealand, and just very much part of the very big Pacific Island community here, and contribute strongly to the culture. For instance, probably about 20 years ago now, there was a hit song on the radio that actually went very, very high up the American charts and worldwide by a guy whose band name was he had a band and he called it OMC, which was the shortened form for Otara, which is the neighborhood he lived in, Otara Millionaires Club. And it was a very ironic name because it was a very poor part of town, but they called the band Otara Millionaires Club. And this, you guys could look it up on YouTube if you like. It's got, just millions of hits. And this was about 20 years ago, and he had a song called How Bizarre. That became a worldwide hit. Now, he was a Niuean, and there are others in New Zealand society who are as much New Zealanders as they are Niueans. So it's certainly not a case of a small, very tightly knit and isolated migrant community. It's more a case of
not as many opportunities, right?
Yeah, opportunities leading people to migrate, and then both being proud of their identity but also assimilated. So and then at the other side of the equation, you ask, well, is it a good thing in terms of Niue itself? One of the things is you drive around the island and there are a lot of empty houses because there are more houses there than there are people, because people have left and migrated. And when you do see people, it's very often elderly people just sitting outside. So maybe quite often quite lonely elderly people because their family have all moved to Auckland and or maybe Sydney and Australia as well. So is it a good thing? I mean, it's probably not a good thing for the local economy in Niue, but one of the phenomena that happens with all of the Pacific Islands is something called remittances, and that is when people who earn more when they have moved away, they send money back. And that's the way that one of the ways the economy keeps going. They don't necessarily go back themselves, but they send money back, and that really helps.
So do you think like Niue government take action to attract more Niueans living in their home country?
I suspect even a Niue government wouldn't want to be too vigorous in promoting the idea of returning to live as long as there are not necessarily jobs there. As tourism picks up again, with COVID settling down, I suspect there will be more tourists who want to go there, and that may well create more jobs. Tourism is always going to be limited by the air connections, however, and generally the air travel connections have been pretty limited. So one flight a week from Auckland, and so if you're going to go, you've got to stay for a whole week and then come back again. And it is quite sort of quite highly defined, and only New Zealand has an air connection there.
So that's quite inconvenient for people who want to visit Niue, right? And maybe that's also one of the reasons why Niue is one of the least visited countries around the world, because there's no direct flights, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But having said that, I think there is a point of difference and attractiveness to some people because there is more of a sense of adventure going there. It's more intriguing because there is less publicity, and whereas here so many people go to Rarotonga and the Cook Islands, or maybe people go to Hawaii or something. But for a country that it is still accessible on a flight once a week, but not everyone goes there. I think it has a different sort of interest factor, and that you're not going to have all the amenities that you would have otherwise when you go there.
Yep.
So maybe it takes a certain amount of being an intrepid traveler to some extent.
And there should also be like a benefit for not having too many tourists visiting the country as well, right? Because then the environment will not be polluted as much.
Oh, absolutely, and I mean, very, very unusual to see rubbish there, and also people are friendly. I think that sometimes when there's too many tourists, you get sick of people. You get sick of tourists. I mean, I live in an island where, if it wasn't for COVID, the population over the summer, goes from 9,000 up to about 35,000, just because so many people come, and that's not even talking about people who come on a ferry for the day, and it sort of reduces the sense of friendliness. But while the COVID pandemic has been on, there's been fewer visitors, and people are more friendly and welcoming because, it's just a more gentle sort of pace, really, I guess. And you get that in Niue. I don't think I've been to a Pacific island where people were as friendly, really, and happy to stop and talk. And
talking about environment, as in global warming is becoming a daunting threat to the world, do you think that Niue could be in danger or could be submerged by the increased sea level?
Yeah, look, it's one of the most safe countries in the Pacific because it is so high up. It's surrounded by cliffs, so the countries that are in most danger are like atolls where they're very, very low lying. Sometimes the atolls like Tuvalu and Kiribati and those countries are just very, very, maybe their highest point is only like 3 meters high or something. But for Niue, very high cliffs all the way around. And if you're going to go to a beach and there are not many beaches, you've got to walk this narrow path down through rocks, through a cliff down to the bottom where the beach is. So all the houses, everything is up high on this almost like a plateau. So there may be other issues about climate change. For instance, if it gets less rainfall, there could be an impact on its availability of fresh water through bores or collecting roof water, but inundation is not going to be a problem.
What's one thing that you wish that New Zealand also has of Niue?
Oh goodness me, that's a hard one. Well, we've already got quite a few Niueans. That's really nice. I don't know really. I mean, it's just a really nice place, and I'm not sure I'd really want to have its characteristics because that's what really makes it unique. But one aspect that is really unique that we do have in some parts of New Zealand, but maybe not quite as reliably. But they're on a migrating route for whales, so it's very easy to sit on certain parts of the coastline of Niue and watch whales surfacing, and pretty exciting, really.
Yeah, I agree with your point. If New Zealand also has special characteristics of Niue, that makes Niue not itself anymore. Well, I guess that's it for our interview today. That's all the questions we have for you. We'd like to especially thank Professor Robin Kearns for spending his time with us despite his busy schedule and to share his knowledge with the community of interested listeners out there. And it's really an honor for us to speak with you today. But do you have any questions for us, Professor Kearns?
Yeah, I do actually. How did you come up with Niue? I mean, it's a bit of an obscure country in the global scheme of things to be asking someone about.
Well, actually, for our podcast project, we were struggling to find what topic we would make the podcast about. And then we came across a fun fact about geography. And then we read Niue has Pokemon money for currency. And we were so shocked and startled by that fact. We searched it up, and in reality, there is Pokemon money currency, and not just Pokemon, they also print Disney characters, Star Wars, Doctor Who's on its money. And it's also it's not commonly used as a legal tender because people prefer to save those special design coins for their own collection. And they are very valuable, actually. So nobody would sell it to pay you for $5 bill. They would rather save for their own collection. So yeah.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard that. Maybe that's quite recent, but it also happens in, for many years when I was a child, I collected stamps, and the Cook Islands, another Pacific country near us, they always have had very, very interesting stamps, and they make quite a bit of money for their local economy by international stamp collectors buying their stamps. So this sounds like a similar sort of thing, and it's not probably a very creative response by a country that has difficulties attracting tourists and export earnings. So that's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
I learned something from you guys, eh?
Yeah.
All right then. Lovely to meet you both, eh? Good luck in your studies.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. We hope that you have had a great time, and we wish you all the best.
You guys have been great interviews. Okay then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.